I have a close friend who was on one end of this story, and that is he was a patient who was subject to a lot of pain from some serious gastrointestinal issues and surgeries, and became addicted to fentanyl. Realized at one point that he was, and this story is so disturbing in so many ways to see what was happening on the other end of this pipeline. But it's important to note, isn't it, that when we talk about the addiction that this caused, these were people who were just basically listening to their doctors and getting treatment for legitimate pain.
I think that's right. I think, there's an image out there of like the opioid epidemic as a problem of abuse. We hear that word a lot. And there's a kind of demonization of the patient who's supposed to be this, quote, pill seeker who, hits up the doctor, maybe resells it on the street. That is like not a fair portrayal of the problem. You have a lot of people who come to the doctor with, legitimately in pain. They feel that, the doctor knows best, as the saying goes. It kind of can sneak up on you that suddenly you're dependent on these drugs.
That's exactly.
That can
I'm
go
sorry.
very
Well,
wrong.
that was, exactly what my friend experienced. And fortunately, he was one of the lucky ones, and he was able to get treatment, and he came out okay on the other side of this thing. But it seems to me it could have gone easily the other way. And I would say that, I think his doctor at one point even was not fully aware what was going on. But this story about what Insys. All right, so tell us who Insys is, what their product was, and when they started to market their product, because all of that is important foundation of this story.
Yeah, so they're like a relative newcomer in the opioid industry. They only launched this drug in 2012, so it was kind of a startup feel to it, and they went public in 2013. And the drug was a player in this pretty niche market of fentanyl prescription drugs, and a lot of people have heard the word fentanyl in the context of it's a really prolific killer in the crisis right now in terms of illicitly manufactured fentanyl that comes from China and Mexico. So this is prescription fentanyl, and it's meant to treat breakthrough cancer pain, which is a specific condition. It's a pretty narrow band of patients. And what Insys did is successfully push the drug out to a much broader group of people at some cost.
What was supposedly, when they entered this market, what was supposedly the innovation that they were providing? Was fentanyl itself the innovation, or was it there was some, OxyContin supposedly was going to be non-addictive, and because of the special time release? Was there some type of innovation, or why did they enter this market?
They were joining like a pre-existing class. There were a handful of similar drugs. But they did have an innovation, and a lot of people have told me, even who are enemies of Insys, that it's a good product. It's the fast onset of action is the main selling point. That this is for people who have like a flare of very serious pain, even though they're already taking other opioids around the clock. And so it's people in very dire circumstances is what it's designed for, really meant for, and what the FDA approved it for. And you can see why a fast onset of action would be a godsend for the right patient. But that's not the way it turned out.
Yeah, I mean, this is a case of basically, it sounds to me like a corporation building a chainsaw and realizing that there wasn't enough trees, so they started telling people that you could use this to cut fabric in your house or something. I mean, is that what was basically happened? Did they find out that there wasn't enough trees, or what?
Because that's a pretty good analogy. It really wasn't it was not a nothing market, but it wasn't the market that they created, which was much larger than breakthrough cancer pain patients. And it's also a good analogy because, you have a tool that's useful, a chainsaw, but it's pretty dangerous if you start just willy-nilly using it for things it wasn't designed for. People talk about like an opioid like this, it's almost like a loaded gun. And, you're to hand it indiscriminately to patients, is an element of malpractice to that.
And so was it, Insys had some projections. Did they miscalculate how many people get cancer each year? Did they not have the proper outreach to doctors, let's say, or hospitals to let them know that it was there? Because clearly, and we'll get into this story in more depth in a moment, because we're talking about a criminal case here. They knew how to push it out the door, it seems to me. But were they not reaching the right people, or did they just simply decide like, we're going to take a big shortcut here?
I think it's that. I mean, they were gaining a little bit of market share. It was very early on, and it wasn't fast enough for the brass at Insys. And this is what former Insys insiders have told me, and they expected this to take off like a rocket. And I think they knew that already the drug was drugs like this were being prescribed. The term is off-label, that is for unapproved uses for people other than the intended population. And they sort of exploited that to the fullest. They targeted their marketing efforts at doctors who were in many cases quite dubious.
And we'll get into that, but let me ask you one more question, and maybe there's just too much conjecture here. But do you think they entered this market, because one part of the story is they just got greedy really quickly and said, we're not hitting our projections, and there's not enough cancer patients out there who have breakthrough pain. We overestimated how much there would be, and so now we got to cut some corners? Or do you think when they built their projections, they had in mind that this is going to creep off label in some ways, and when it didn't creep off label, they decided to push it off label?
Mm-hmm. That is a good question. I do think there was a kind of turning point in the company where things took a dark turn, where they hired a key executive, and that was like after the initial months of sales had been disappointing. And I think he had experience in this market. And what it sounds like to me, and you're right, there is an element of conjecture here, so I want to be careful. What it sounds like to me is that he kind of convinced them that, this is the way it works in this market. I know it sounds ugly, but this is how we're going to do it.
All right. Well, let's take a break, Evan, and when we come back, let's talk about how it is that they did it and what, in fact, they did, and why there are multiple executives of Insys Therapeutics who are looking at criminal charges right now. We're talking to Evan Hughes from written in the New York Times about the pain hustlers. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back.